Your key to life and your key to success is going to depend upon your walk with him, your relationship with him, you talking to him, and being in a mode where you are receiving this from him. He goes on, though, in chapter 13 and verse 4. There are 5 critical verbs here in verse 4 of Deuteronomy 13 that must be experienced in our lives. Moses writes, serve only the Lord your God and fear him alone. Obey the commands, listen to his voice, and cling to him. Those are 5 verbs. Serve, fear, obey, listen, and cling. If I'm not experiencing this, if I am not serving it, well, what does it mean to serve? What does it mean to fear him? What does it mean to obey him? What does it mean to listen to his voice? What does it mean to cling to him? Moses wants them to understand, because keep in mind of what they're having to deal with, Marcy. They're getting ready to occupy the promised land where everyone and all the nations there are at least 7 specific nations: the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, and I'm not going to finish the rest. You get the picture. Their cup of iniquity had already been filled. They already have a syncretic religion that involves prostitutes in the temple, that involves them sacrificing and burning their own children. They are about to occupy this land. And so therefore, God wants them to understand that if you're going to remain faithful to me, if you're going to be able to resist the virulent strains of idolatry that's there in the land, you're going to have single focus. You're going to have an undivided heart. You're going to have a commitment that is renewed on a daily basis so that you can serve me and only me. You're going to have to cling to me. The Hebrew context of this word is gripping. It kind of reveals something like handcuffs. And I know that handcuffs have a negative connotation, especially for any of you who have ever found yourself on the other side of the law. Don't know if you've ever been handcuffed before. But when you are, you lose a degree of mobility. You are impeded. Well, the spiritual, you're restricted, yes. The spiritual connotation here of what Moses is saying is that when you cling to him, on one hand, he is saying you need to be handcuffed to Jesus. But the free moral agency kicks in, because in literal handcuffs, you can't get away. But when you're clinging to Jesus and you're holding on to God, you still have the ability to release yourself. But what Moses wants them to understand is that in this relationship with God, when you get to know him and the love is expanding, you will cling to him, and that love is going to be so powerful and so transformative and so revealing and so encouraging and strengthening us that we will not want to let go of him. Now, this presupposes then that there is something you and I have to do. And it is wonderfully depicted in Deuteronomy chapter 17. Turn there with me real quickly. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, and beginning with verse 18. In Deuteronomy 17, actually, if you look at verse 14, God gives Moses guidelines for the new king, if they were ever to have a king. But it is actually in verse 18 that I want us to focus on. Now, this is talking about the king. These are the instructions that God gives him. When he sits on the throne as king, he must copy for himself this body of instruction on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. He must always keep that copy with him and read it daily as long as he lives. That way he will learn to fear the Lord, his God, by obeying all the terms of these instructions and decrees. In other words, when a king came on the throne, this was something he had to do. He had to get a scroll, and he had to take the copy that Moses had written with his own hand. And in the presence of the priests, he had to handwrite and make a copy of all of God's instructions and commands. And then he was to read it daily. Now you're saying, well, what does this have to do with me, Pastor? I'm not the king. Here is a spiritual principle that God is outlining, that is laying out for us. He is showing us on how the king was to preserve his fidelity. It was a way that he was to shore up his heart. It was a way that he was going to build his defenses around his soul. In the New Testament, we see this same principle. And in our spiritual disciplines, in our walk with God, if this is what the king had to do, what about you? And what about me?